Welcome to MurderFiles 101. Tonight, we open a file that has rarely been spoken aloud, the case of Room 101. It begins in an unremarkable hotel, a place where travelers came and went without leaving a trace. But one guest left more than a memory. They left horror. It left horror. Before we go deeper into this case, I want to know something. Where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Because as this story unfolds, the clock will matter more than you think. Room 100. One was not just a number, it was a countdown. The characters in this story were ordinary on the surface. A young couple on the road, a desk clerk with tired eyes, a detective nearing retirement. None of them could have guessed that Room 101 would bind them together in a puzzle of blood, silence, and impossible contradictions. The victim was Eleanor Shaw, 28 years old, traveling alone. Her check-in was uneventful, her demeanor polite, her luggage light. Witnesses described her as friendly, though distant, as if carrying a secret no one was meant to see. That secret would not survive the night, neither would she. The suspect pool was thin, yet unsettling. A businessman in the room next door, a maid who swore she heard nothing, the night clerk who claimed he never left his post, and a guest who checked out just before dawn, leaving no forwarding address, no trace of existence at all. The hotel itself was nothing remarkable. 4 stories tall, brick exterior, neon sign humming against the night sky. Locals called it a stopover, not a destination. Yet for decades, whispers clung to one room above all others. Room 101. A room that seemed to attract endings, not beginnings. The strangest detail surfaced before investigators ever saw the body. At precisely 2:17 a.m., multiple guests reported hearing 3 dull knocks, not on their doors, but echoing through the corridor. Each assumed it was someone else. Later, the timing would match perfectly with Eleanor Shaw's last recorded heartbeat. Detective Harold Crane was first on the scene. 61 years old, greying temples, a man tired of late-night calls. Yet when he stepped into Room 101, his exhaustion curdled into silence. Nothing about the scene aligned with protocol. No forced entry, no weapon. Just Eleanor, lifeless, as though posed. Her hands were folded across her chest, palms upward. On her right hand, a faint smudge of ash. Not dirt, not blood. The bedsheets were pulled taut, hospital neat, as if arranged by someone meticulous. Crane noted these things, but what unsettled him most was the absence of sound. The corridor outside was silent too. Security cameras failed at 2:15 a.m. Exactly 2 minutes before the 3 knocks were heard. Power returned at 2:18. The hotel claimed it was a brief outage, but the detective knew better. In his career, outages never aligned so perfectly with death. Eleanor Shaw's background only deepened the mystery. She was a schoolteacher from Illinois, respected, quiet, with no criminal ties. Her travel records suggested nothing unusual. No meetings, no affairs, no debts. Yet her body lay in Room 101, arranged with intention. Someone had chosen her. Someone had made a message. By dawn, police had sealed the floor. Guests whispered through locked doors, staring at the tape, hearing footsteps of investigators. The morning papers would mention only an incident. No names, no room numbers. But among those who lived it, the legend of Room 101 had already begun to breathe. The hotel manager insisted it was the first death in his establishment. Records suggested otherwise. Decades earlier, another traveler had vanished from Room 101, checked in, never checked out. The file was thin, barely remembered. Crane pulled it anyway, wondering if he was chasing a pattern only he could see. Eleanor's family received the news with disbelief. She had left on vacation, promising postcards and phone calls. Instead, they received a body with questions attached. Her sister described her as cautious, always locking doors, always double-checking. She wouldn't let anyone in that room, she said. Yet someone had entered. And so begins the file we open tonight. A story of silence, precision, and unanswered questions. The twisted murder case of Room 101 remains one of the most chilling and overlooked mysteries in modern history, and if you've never heard of it before, there's a reason. Some files resist closure. Detective Harold Crane began his inquiry with the only certainty he had. Eleanor Shaw had not died naturally. The autopsy would later confirm suffocation, though no bruising or trauma supported it. For now, Crane worked with the room itself. He photographed the folded hands, the smudge of ash, the crisp sheets. He studied the door, no forced entry, no scratches on the lock. Only Eleanor's keycard had been used. Yet hotel records showed a duplicate card printed the day before, though staff swore it was destroyed. The log of keycard entries offered no relief. It showed the door had been opened twice that night, once when Eleanor entered, and once again at 2:16 a.m. The exact minute the lights cut out. Surveillance should have revealed who approached her door, but the outage erased that. Crane pressed the manager, the clerk, the staff, but none could account for the error. He left the hotel that morning with nothing but unease. His report noted anomalous entry, unexplained outage, and possible staging. But off the record, Crane scribbled a question only he saw: who folds the dead like that? Eleanor's personal life revealed no obvious threat. Her luggage contained simple travel clothes, a paperback novel, and a journal half filled with lists of places she wanted to visit. The last entry was a single phrase: 2:17. Listen. That time matched the knocks, the outage, the failing heartbeat. Crane replayed the detail in his mind, turning it over like a coin. Had she known, or had someone forced her to write it? Her family insisted the handwriting was hers. Her colleagues painted her as quiet, withdrawn, devoted to teaching but distant from friendships. No boyfriends, no enemies. Yet her journal hinted at paranoia. Weeks earlier she had written about feeling followed. Someone behind me again. Same coat, same shoes. Police in her hometown dismissed her claims as nerves. But standing in the silence of room 101, Crane wondered if she had been right all along. He contacted the bus depot where she had bought her ticket, asking for footage. What he received was grainy, distorted, yet chilling. Eleanor, stepping onto the bus, glancing behind her. A man boarded seconds later. His face turned briefly toward the camera, but the tape glitched, freezing his features into blur. Crane's instincts pulled him back to the hotel. He questioned the guests nearest room 101. The businessman in 103 denied hearing anything, though his expression betrayed unease. The maid recalled nothing unusual, except for one detail. The curtains in room 101 had been drawn differently than Eleanor usually left them. She liked them open, the maid explained. Yet when the body was found, the curtains were closed tight. Crane returned to the crime scene, staring at the fabric folds. It was such a small act, yet it spoke of presence. Someone had touched them after Eleanor. The room offered other fragments, a faint scratch on the metal frame of the window, too high for Eleanor to have made. No footprints, but Crane knew absence was sometimes louder than presence. He called for a second sweep, ordering luminol. Under its glow, faint streaks appeared near the dresser, not blood, but something oily, chemical. Traces of candle soot clung to the wall, invisible until light caught it. Crane thought of the smudge on Eleanor's hand. Ash, soot. Was this a ritual, or was someone staging something to look like one? The duplicate keycard became Crane's next obsession. Records showed it had been printed by a trainee clerk. She admitted she had accidentally created two cards when reprogramming room 101. One she destroyed, the other she gave Eleanor, but Crane knew hotel software logged each card's identity. The mysterious second entry at 2:16 a.m. matched not Eleanor's card, but the destroyed duplicate. Crane pressed the clerk harder. Had she truly shredded it? She swore she had. The machine had malfunctioned before, she claimed. But her voice trembled as she spoke. Crane left unconvinced. He tracked down the maintenance records for the system. Weeks earlier the machine had glitched, printing cards without registering the operator. That meant someone could create access without leaving a trace. But how would they know Eleanor would be in that room? Reservations were random, yet room 101 had been specifically assigned to her. A manager claimed it was chance, but Crane wrote the words deliberate placement in his notebook. In mysteries, chance was rarely innocent. By the second week, Crane's investigation grew heavier. The autopsy confirmed suffocation, yet the method baffled examiners. No pillow fibers in the airway, no bruising on the throat. The medical examiner called it air denial without trauma. Eleanor had simply stopped breathing, as if forced by will alone. Rumors spread among the staff. Some whispered that room 101 was cursed. Others claimed the knocks at 217 had been heard before, in older incidents tied to the room. Crane dismissed superstition, but unease gnawed at him. He revisited the journal, staring again at Eleanor's last words. 217. Listen. It was less a note than an instruction. To listen for what? The knocks? The silence? Or something only she could hear? Crane began to suspect Eleanor had been marked long before she entered the hotel. Her death was not opportunistic, but prepared. The blurred man on the bus, the duplicate key, the soot and ash, each pointed not to randomness, but orchestration. And in Crane's private notes, a phrase repeated itself in heavy script. Room 101 is not a place, it's a choice. Detective Crane began comparing Eleanor's case to older police reports tied to the hotel. He discovered something unsettling. In 1989, a traveling salesman vanished after checking into room 101. In 1972, a young woman was found unconscious in the same room, revived, but incoherent, repeating only one phrase. He knocked. Both cases were dismissed as coincidence. The records thin, but the echoes were undeniable. Crane built a timeline, overlaying the dates. The gaps were decades apart, yet every case carried the same strange element. Silence in the corridor, power fluctuations, missing or distorted surveillance. None had produced a conviction. As he mapped them, he realized Eleanor's death was not the first thread in this tapestry. It was simply the most recent. And the timing, 2:17 a.m., repeated again and again across the archives. Crane circled it in red. A time that meant nothing, yet everything. The question was whether the killer had returned every generation, or whether the room itself had chosen its victims. To test the theory of intrusion, Crane arranged for forensic techs to spend a night in room 101, cameras, microphones, motion sensors, all calibrated to catch even the faintest anomaly. At 2:17 a.m., something happened. The video feed glitched, cutting to static for exactly 60 seconds. When it returned, the techs were still in the room, unharmed, but visibly shaken. They swore they heard the 3 knocks, followed by a sensation of pressure, as if the air itself thickened. One technician described it as trying to breathe through a locked door. The data confirmed a sudden drop in oxygen levels during that minute, without mechanical explanation. No gas leaks, no ventilation failures, just a momentary denial of air. Crane replayed the footage, watching the men sit still, eyes wide, sweat on their brows. No intruder, no physical threat. Yet the same conditions that killed Eleanor had nearly repeated themselves. Crane noted the findings with dread. The case was shifting beyond human malice. Something invisible, deliberate, and recurring was at play. Despite the chilling results, Crane refused to let superstition guide his report. He searched deeper into the ownership records of the hotel, tracing its lineage back to its construction in 1921. The builder, a man named Walter Greaves, had been rumored to belong to a fringe sect that believed in rooms of passage. These rooms, according to old pamphlets, were meant as gateways between worlds of silence and breath. Greaves died before completing his writings, but whispers clung to his name. Crane dismissed most of it as folklore, yet one fact pierced through. Greaves had numbered the rooms himself. Room 101 was his private study before the hotel opened. On the original blueprints, Crane discovered faint markings, 3 small symbols etched into the walls of that room. When compared with modern photographs, the symbols were still there, hidden beneath layers of paint. Were they decoration or instruction? Crane didn't know, but the placement matched precisely where the soot had been found in Eleanor's case. The blurred man from the bus footage returned to Crane's thoughts. He requested enhancements from the lab, frame by frame, attempting to carve features from the distortion. The result was haunting. The man's outline was sharp, but his face refused to resolve, as if the distortion was not failure, but intent. Analysts claimed it was simply poor tape quality. Crane disagreed. He noticed something else. The figure always kept one hand inside his coat pocket, never moving it. In every frame, no matter the angle, the hand was hidden. Crane wondered if the hand concealed a device, perhaps something that interfered with surveillance, the same way the hotel cameras had failed. If so, this man was no ghost, but a technician of shadows, someone who understood how to control what others could not see. Crane added a new line to his notes. The man in blur knows 217. By now, Eleanor's family demanded answers. Crane met with her sister, who insisted Eleanor had spoken of a recurring dream weeks before her trip. In it, she stood before a door marked 101. She would knock 3 times, wait, and then wake choking for breath. "It's also me," and then wake choking for breath. The dream unsettled her so much that she began carrying a small notebook, recording each time it returned. The last entry was 2 days before her death. Crane left the meeting chilled. Eleanor had walked into her own nightmare. Whether coincidence or orchestration, the overlap was undeniable. He now faced 2 possibilities. Either a person had manipulated Eleanor's fears, exploiting her visions to stage her murder, or something older, bound to the number and the room, had reached for her, as it had others before. For the first time in years, Crane felt his investigation slipping beyond the grasp of logic. He closed his notebook slowly, staring at the word he had underlined again and again: pattern. Crane rebuilt the missing minute. He pulled the hotel's HVAC trend logs, the power quality readouts from the utility, and audio collected by guests on their phones. The feeds lined up like teeth in a gear. At 2:16 a.m., the floor's camera looped into static for exactly 60 seconds. At 2:17, 3 dull knocks traveled the corridor, recorded faintly on a guest's voicemail as a soft mechanical thud. At the same instant, a portable air quality sensor in the housekeeping cart, left charging by the elevator, registered a sudden drop in oxygen near room 101, recovering by 2:18. The pattern wasn't supernatural. It was engineered. Crane walked the corridor in silence and pressed his palm to the wall between rooms 101 and the service shaft. Behind the paint, he felt the dull hum of piping. He remembered the soot on Eleanor's hand and the micro scratches on the window frame. Nothing about this belonged to impulse. Someone had rehearsed the choreography: blackout knocks, air denial, recovery, sliding a murder into the space where most crimes leave noise. A second forensic teardown of room 101 revealed what the first missed. A screw head beneath the dresser showed fresh wear, soft metal, scarred by a narrow bit. When technicians removed the baseboard panel, a shallow cavity appeared, an access pocket leading to the vertical service shaft. Inside, they found adhesive residue in a neat rectangle, the outline of a device no longer present. Trace chem swabs came back positive for magnesium oxide and calcium carbonate, consistent with spent desiccants, or the burn-off from a small igniter. In the shaft itself, a smudge of soot ringed a pipe junction, where a threaded cap had been loosened and retightened. The hotel's mechanical drawings showed that junction vented into the headboard niche of 101 through a pinhole equalization port. In plain terms, it was a hidden airway. If someone introduced a dense, non-toxic but oxygen-displacing gas into the shaft during the blackout, a sleeping person could asphyxiate without bruising, fibers, or obvious trauma. The folded hands, the crisp sheets, those were theatre. The real attack lived in the wall. Crane chased the man in blur the old way, by what he carried, not the face he hid. The coat was a technician's parka, with reinforced pocket seams common to tool-weighted garments. The shoes were slip-resistant with ladder-safe midsoles, the kind ordered in lots for elevator and fire suppression contractors. He subpoenaed vendor logs and found a service call 6 weeks earlier from a small outfit contracted to inspect riser valves and camera housings. The sign-in name was K. Vale, driver's license scanned. Address later proved to be a mail drop. A hotel back-office camera captured only his silhouette at the dock, but Crane froze on one habit. The right hand never left the parka pocket. When he located a prior job across town, the same habit appeared on an old loading bay camera. Technicians who worked with portable RF jammers often kept them pocketed, thumb on a momentary switch. A jammer could smother consumer-grade cameras long enough for a quiet minute. Vale, if that was his name, had the skills to blind the corridor, reach the shaft, and dose the room without ever touching the door. To test the hypothesis, Crane requested a controlled reenactment with safety oversight. In an empty, sealed room, identical to 101, technicians introduced a measured pulse of cold CO thrains through the shaft equalization port. While monitoring O-thite saturation, air temperature, they replicated the 3 knocks by opening and closing a valve downline. The sound rode the pipe like a slow heartbeat. For 60 seconds, oxygen dipped enough to cause dizziness, panic, and reflex air hunger. No bruising, no fibers. Nothing a standard autopsy would flag if exposure was brief and the scene reset. When the pulse ended, levels rebounded naturally as the heavier gas sank and diffused under the door gap. The team left fingerprints on nothing. With practiced hands, a killer could stage the bed, fold the victim's hands, and be gone down the shaft before power returned. The test didn't solve motive, it solved the method. Air denial without trauma now had a blueprint. Crane filed the findings, aware that he had crossed from rumor into engineering, from ghost story into a diagram with valves, times and switches. Motives surfaced in patterns. Crane mapped K. Vale's service calls across 15 years. They clustered at older properties with original riser shafts and legacy camera circuits, buildings where a single jammer could darken a corridor and a single valve could breathe into a room. In 3 cities, decades apart, minor incidents echoed the Room 101 signature, brief outages near 2:17 a.m., reports of door knocks with no caller, occupants found unconscious or dead with ambiguous findings. No charges had stuck. The rooms were blamed, not the design. A former supervisor recalled Vale's fixation with thresholds and clean jobs. No marks, no struggle. A personnel exit interview, buried in HR, noted the death of Vale's mother at 2:17 a.m. when he was a teenager, a time he wrote on every training form thereafter. Grief can curdle into ritual, obsession can harden into process. Crane didn't romanticize it. He understood only that someone had turned a time, a number, and an architecture into a weapon. The room had never chosen anyone, a man had, and if Crane couldn't find him fast, another 101 somewhere would be waiting for the minute to arrive. Crane's pursuit of K. Vale began with small traces, service invoices, scrap receipts, and a string of prepaid cell accounts, tied together with the same billing date, the 17th of each month. Each number ran silent, except for one call, always placed at 2:17 a.m., lasting less than 60 seconds, to a disconnected landline. Vale was calling into nothing, rehearsing the minute the way a priest rehearses prayer. With a warrant, Crane tracked shipments of industrial CO cholate canisters. One order had been signed for 2 towns away, the recipient a man matching Vale's silhouette. But the trail bent. Addresses led to rented storage units, each stripped clean before police arrived. Notebooks filled with numbers, times and sketches of ventilation grids lay in shredded fragments. Crane pieced them together like scripture. The handwriting circled only one phrase, again and again: silence folds the living. For Crane it confirmed what he had suspected. Vale had ritualized the act. He wasn't killing for money or revenge. He was killing to keep a pattern alive, to give shape to a grief only he understood. Crane finally found Vale's face, not in surveillance, but in paper. A faded driver's license application, filed under a birth name buried deep in county archives, cross-checked with school records. It placed him in a town where, indeed, his mother had collapsed and died at 2:17 a.m. in their apartment kitchen. A natural cardiac arrest, ruled sudden and unexplained. Vale had been 16. Witness reports described the boy kneeling beside her, unable to breathe himself, gasping until the paramedics arrived. Trauma calcified into obsession. Every system he later learned, HVAC, valves, electronics, fed into repeating that minute with others. Crane secured warrants, but Vale was already in motion. A hotel clerk in another city reported a man with heavy tools, checking riser valves, signing K. Vale, without hesitation. By the time police arrived, the guest in room 101 was already dead. Another woman, same age range, hands folded, time of death logged as 2:17. The copycat theory collapsed. Vale wasn't copying, he was continuing. Each crime polished sharper than the last, each one closing without a fingerprint left behind. The Bureau joined in, widening the net across states. But Vale anticipated them. He rented rooms under false names, used older buildings with shafts too costly to modernize. He carried no phone once the trail heated, leaving only the echoes of outages and the faint thud of his signature knocks. Crane pressed harder, following the minute like a tide chart. Twice. He arrived only hours after Vale had left, smelling faint soot and detergent in the shaft cavities, signs of a freshly cleaned stage. It became a contest of patience. At night, Crane stared at the photographs, Eleanor's folded hands, the curtain drawn shut, the ash smudge on her skin. They were rehearsals in grief, Vale reliving his loss by scripting it into others. Crane warned colleagues that Vale's obsession would not end voluntarily. A ritual has no retirement. It only stops when something breaks. The man, the method, or the minute itself. But in the meantime, hotels across the map carried room 101S of their own, silent and waiting, their numbers like open invitations. A near capture came in St. Louis. Police raided a vacant building, where Vale had staged a trial run. Inside room 101, renumbered with a paper placard, they found a mannequin arranged on a bed, the shaft open, valves rigged to release timed gas bursts. A small metronome ticked on the nightstand, stopped at 2:17. Vale had been there hours before, testing the rhythm, calibrating his silent machine. Forensics gathered tool impressions, wire cuttings, and notes scribbled on wallpaper scraps. Fold them still, one line read, and they pass quiet. But Vale slipped again, leaving behind only his ritual, and a silence too practiced to be luck. Crane pressed his team. Vale was escalating. He wasn't content to kill quietly anymore. He was building toward a demonstration, a room where his silence could consume more than one at a time. The danger was no longer limited to a single guest behind a single door. It was the idea of scaling silence into spectacle. The question became not who he would choose, but where. The file on Vale remains open. Rumors place him across the Midwest, working under false contracts, slipping into old buildings whose rooms align with his obsession. Some investigators believe he died years ago, his silence finally folding back on him. Others whisper that the trail continues, hidden beneath outages no one records, doors no one reopens. Detective Crane retired without closing the case. His final memo clipped to Eleanor Shaw's folder. It contained no arrest, no conviction, only a line written in Crane's careful script. The pattern survives the man. Watch the rooms. Listen at 2:17. And so the case of room 101 remains. Not solved, not buried, but suspended in a file that resists closure. A murder designed without fingerprints, built on silence and ritual, folded into the architecture of ordinary walls. You may never have heard of it before tonight, but now you have. And as the clock creeps closer to its minute, you may wonder what waits behind the next closed door numbered 101. Some stories end with an arrest, some with a trial, But the file of room 101 never gave us that comfort. It closes only with silence, a silence that still leaks through old walls, carrying the faint echo of knocks. No one wants to answer. Eleanor Shaw remains the name on the record, but she is not the only one. The salesman, the woman revived, the victims scattered across cities, they all belong to the same pattern. A pattern carved into time. A pattern that survives even when men and machines fade. Detective Crane retired without solving it. Vale, if he was Vale at all, vanished without a trace. What remains are rooms that look like every other, doors that carry ordinary numbers, and clocks that strike minutes we no longer trust. At 2:17, the file goes quiet. At 2:17, the story stops breathing. And if you ever find yourself in a hallway where silence presses too hard, remember this case. The walls may still be listening. We've reached the end of this account, but not the end of what waits. Another file waits to be opened, another story the world tried to bury. Stay with us, and don't miss the next chapter here on Murder Files 101. Until then, keep the lights steady, keep the doors locked, and keep listening. Silence does not always mean safety. Sometimes it means the story has just begun.